My name is Debbie McBride. I thought I would tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up, I was a mess, and God has changed my life, and that's why I'm here today. None other than I love Him with all my heart. He has changed my life, and I don't ever want to be the same again. And if He can use anything that He's taught me to encourage you, then I'm grateful. I am married. My husband is a pastor. We do not sit around he doesn't play the piano, but he does play all the musical instruments, the guitars. We do not sit around our house and sing hymns and quote the Bible every day. Our house is just like your house. I have 3 children that are going to be 21, 23, and 25 this year. One's still at home, and we're grateful for that. Our son, you can pray for him. His name is Caleb. He has been in Toronto for 2 weeks training to be cross-cultural training in Toronto to go for 2 years to be a missionary in Leon, Mexico. He will be coming home. You can pray for him. He's in Toronto, and the weather's Toronto. It's fine, but he can't get to Dallas. So he's trying to get to Houston. So they're hopefully going to take him to Charlotte, and then he'll go on to Houston and get there about midnight tonight. So if you'd say a prayer for Caleb. And he leaves on March the 11th for 2 years to Leon, Mexico. He's going with the Navigators organization. So I'm trusting that God can protect him anywhere, that it's not a bigger deal for God to do it in Spicewood, or Leon. He's got it. So, but thank you for praying. And I have a daughter who lives in the Dallas area with lots of snow, and a wonderful son-in-law. And I think I said I have a husband, right? Anyway, we're going to talk today, and I'll try to talk kind of fast, about, have you ever found yourself in a situation that you kind of go, I don't know what I was expecting, but this is not it. Right. And I think that I love the Bible because in Romans 15:4 it says, everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through endurance and encouragement of the Scripture, we might have hope. So I believe that we're going to share a few stories in my life where I ended up in situations I didn't think about, but we're going to look at Scripture where I think a couple of different stories where they ended up when they would have said, this is not what I was expecting. So when I went to college, I grew up in a little town east of Lubbock. It's the name Spur, very, very small. And Lubbock was the big city. I mean, people from Spur did not drive in Lubbock because it's just too dangerous, So I had only known that, But when I graduated from high school in Spur, our senior trip was, we took a charter bus to Six Flags, and we got there at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and we left at 5 o'clock in the morning. And that was the first time I'd ever been to the city, done anything, But I went to junior college in Levelland, South Plains Junior College. My granny did not want me to go to Texas Tech because it was so evil. Now, I've since lived in Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, and Austin, and, thankfully, for her sake, she's not been here for that part. But anyway, when I graduated from junior college, I had an opportunity to go to the Bahamas. And I was like, wow, that is perfect. And it was going to cost like $600. I remember that, and I was paying for it. It was cool. So I was so excited. I just seen Love Boat on TV and things. So I'm thinking, cruise, I should have had a clue when it was only $600, but I didn't. So I had all these cute clothes. I was so ready, so prepared to go to the Bahamas. So we drove, a group of us. I think I knew one of the people, but it was just college friends. So we drove and went to Miami from Lubbock. And we got there, and it was like a sailboat, basically. I don't even know really what you call it. It was just a big boat that we went down in there to sleep. I think we probably used sleeping bags. It did not have a shower on there. I think we bathed in the water. I don't know. We might have spent the night at one place when we went in or something. And I remember there was 25 cases of beer and milk on to drink. We did our own cooking. We had to help steer the boat. And the captain was he was literally a drunk. It was so bad. I was like, oh my gosh, this is awful. I can't believe this is happening. And it was just, But matter of fact, I caught a plane in Miami. I just said, I've had it. I can't do this. After it was over, I did do the Bahamas thing. But I remember thinking, this is not what I was expecting. So, and it was after that God changed my life, and I graduated from college, worked with Baptist Student Union for a couple of years, and I got married. And my husband and I moved to Kingsville for Mark to work with the Texas A&I BSU Baptist Student Union. And I don't know I have a problem that I realized after 2 years of being married that I really can't take the birth control pill because it really just kind of changes my personality. It just kind of makes me not very nice. And I didn't know that. I just thought I was just starting to not be very nice. But anyway, I remember sort of at the end of our first year of thinking, let's just part as friends, no hard feelings. This is too much work. Well, when we had just been married just a few short months, we were having some people over to our house for a bachelor party. He worked with college students, and we were at HEB in Kingsville, and it was he and I, and then another couple had gone in to get some stuff, and we were in the car, and we're arguing. And he looks at me, my husband, of just a few months, looks at me, and he goes, I don't know what I expected when we got married, but this is not it. And he says, I have never argued with anyone so much in my whole life. And I was like, and I said, well, it's because you've never had any relationship with any depth. Because if you do, you will argue. Because unless one of you is a doormat, you are going to argue. And you're not a doormat, and I'm not a doormat, therefore we argue. He's just like, and we just started, okay? But we've been married 28 years, and I think it's not what we expected, but it's good, okay? So I kind of think sometimes our problem is not necessarily that the situation is so bad, it's the fact that it's not what we expected. And so those are my two little stories. And I'm sure you have situations where you go, oh, this is not what I expected. And I think as believers, we sometimes think that when we love God, everything's going to be good. We really kind of think that in this life, we're going to be able to fix everything, or everything's going to be good, and everything's going to be smooth. And there's a book. It's really a hard book, but it's called Where is God When It Hurts by Philip Yancey. Oh, he just kind of goes, why did you think it was going to be easy? You know, he just says, it's never going to be okay this side of heaven. You're always going to have something that's not right because we weren't made for this world. But we're going to look at the disciples in Mark chapter 4. And I was looking at the beginning of Mark because they're with Jesus, you know, John's told them about Jesus, and then Jesus is starting to pick the disciples, and the disciples are with him, and he's healing lepers, he's healing various diseases, he's speaking with authority, everybody's wanting to follow him. I mean, we're in a better place to be than with Jesus. I mean, you know, they were in the in crowd, they've just been fishermen, probably not a lot of people knew who they were, but all of a sudden they're with Jesus, and their lives, it sounds like, from what we hear about the disciples, things were okay. I mean, they had a business, they were doing things, and they got to be with Jesus, and they're around all these people that have all these issues. It's really not them. You don't hear them talking about having to fix the disciples. It was more Jesus fixing everybody else. So the disciples were kind of like, this is good. I like this. And I've kind of been there. Where you're going, this is good. Life is good. And we can tell people, oh, I'll pray for you, you know, but everything's good for us, and we just expect it, right? We just kind of start thinking, well, this is the way it's going to be. But I want you to see, we're going to look at two different stories and two different places in the Bible that I think people found themselves in situations they would have been surprised about. So, Mark chapter 4, verse 35, it says, that day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? I'm thinking right now, they're probably going, okay, this is not what I was expecting, you know. I'm in the boat, you're in the boat, this should not be happening. He got up, rebuked the wind and the waves. Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." We think, I looked up the definition for peace, and we've heard it shared, and you've heard it in your seminars and different things. Freedom from the mind, from annoyance or distraction, tranquility, serenity. I kind of taught this lesson in my Sunday school class the other day. They let me practice. And they were like, one of the men said, "I would never have peace if that was it." I mean, how many times are you free from distraction or annoyance? You know, if that's the only time we can have peace is when everything is calm, then that's not very often. But Jesus says in John 14:27, "I've came so that you can, my peace I leave you. My peace I give you, not as the world gives you." There's a difference kind of peace that we have when we're walking with Jesus, that we can have. That peace of, I don't know how it's going to be okay, but it's going to be okay. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but it's going to be okay. Because Jesus didn't just come for the other people's messes in our lives, he came for our messes. And Deuteronomy 31:8 says, "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you or forsake you." Then he says, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged." Well, you would think if it said the Lord himself goes before you, he'll be with you, he will never leave you or forsake you, so everything is going to be great, right? That's what it... No, but he says, "I'll be with you, I won't forsake you, so don't be discouraged, don't be afraid." Well, he's with us. I think he said that because he knew there were going to be things in our life that were going to discourage us, and there were going to be things in our life that were going to make us afraid. And Isaiah 41:13 is one of my all-time favorite verses, and this is the Lord's proclamation. He says, "I'm the Lord your God, who takes you by the right hand and says to you, 'Do not fear, I'll help you. Don't be afraid, I'll help you.'" That's the promise. That's where peace, because he says, you know what? I know the next step you're going to take. I know what you're fixing to do. But you don't have to be afraid, because I'll help you. He didn't say there's nothing going to happen that's going to make you afraid. He just says, you don't have to be afraid. I'll help you. And I believe that's so true. I can hear God say that. I can feel his hand in mine. And I pray that you'll do that, because that's what he said. That's promise that God has given us. And in Isaiah 26:3, where it says, "He will keep in perfect peace him whose mind is stayed on him," because we trust in him. We can have peace, not freedom from annoyance and distraction, not that kind of peace, but his peace, the peace that passes all understanding, the perfect peace that's ours. And it says on John 16:33, this is what Jesus says, "In this world you will have trouble." You know, that's what Philip Yancey's kind of saying, hello, why did you think? No, in this world you will have trouble, okay? And I was going to say it later, but I'll tell you, I've been watching the new weather, because my kids have got one in Toronto, and I've already got it in Mexico to see what it's going to be like when he gets there, and then Dallas, I'm looking at everybody's weather, and our friends from Florence didn't get to come today because the roads were too bad. You know, girls, there's storm warnings. We got storms on the horizon. If they're not going to be here today, they're coming. You know, and we see that all the time in our world today. But let's look at the scriptures. So these are some things I think the disciples forgot, and that we would do well to remember is, you know, Jesus said that day when evening came. Well, you know what? Evening comes. Evening always comes. We talk about light and darkness. We live in a world that is filled with darkness. So we're going to have darkness. We lived out in the country in Lexington, east of Dallas, east of Austin, I'm sorry. And sometimes when I would drive home at night, it was so dark. It was so dark. And I was right down my road, and it was safe out there. I would just turn the lights off in my car. The doors are locked. And I would just sit there, and I would just be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how dark it is. Because you're just so used to being in the city where there's some lights, but it's so dark. That was a good kind of dark, because I knew I was inside my car and it was safe. But sometimes things in life happen that are just so dark. And the story I wanted to share with you is a story that I found. It's talking about a daddy whose wife had died, and he had a little 5-year-old daughter, and felt like he was facing an enemy beyond his strength. And they had the funeral service for her, and that day, after the funeral, several people that just loved him, said, don't go home, come to our house, just wait a little while. And he says, no, we have to face this. My daughter and I have to do this together. So he went home, and he took her, apparently she had a little bed, and he just brought that little bed in there and put it down beside his bed, and she just cried, and, it was just sad, and he says that as the minutes slipped by, the young girl was having a dreadful time trying to sleep, and so was her father. What could pierce a man's heart deeper than a child sobbing for a mother who would never come back? Long into the night, the little one continued to weep. The big man reached down into her bed and tried to comfort her as best he could. After a while, the girl managed to stop crying, but only out of sorrow for her father. Thinking his daughter was asleep, the daughter looked up and said brokenly, I trust you. Thinking his daughter was asleep, the father said, I trust you, Father, but it's as dark as the midnight. Hearing her dad's prayer, the little girl began to cry again. I thought you were asleep, baby, he said. Papa, I did try. I was sorry for you. I did try, but I couldn't go to sleep. Papa, did you ever know it could be so dark? Then, through her tears, the little girl whispered, but you love me even when it's dark, don't you, Papa? You love me even when I don't see you, don't you, Papa? For an answer, the big man reached across with his massive hands, lifted his little girl out of her bed, and brought her over onto his chest and held her until at last she fell asleep. When she was finally quiet, he began to pray. He took his little daughter's cry to him and passed it up to God. Father, it's dark as midnight. I can't see you at all. But you love me even when it's dark and I can't see you, don't you? From the blackest of hours, the Lord touched him with new strength, enabling him to carry on. He knew that God went on loving him even in the dark. And that kind of dark is a tough dark, but it is a time that God still loves us even when it's dark. And evening does come. Evening does come. But the next part it says, Jesus had already said, let's go over to the other side. Jesus, I might tell you, let's go over across the lake, which we don't have much water now, or let's go to Marble Falls, let's go to Florence. And we might get there, we might not, because we might have an accident and I can't do anything about it. But when Jesus says, let's go over to the other side, he can get you there. He can get you there. There were fishermen in there that were professional fishermen, but they couldn't do anything about the storm. You would think, who do you want to be in your boat? The best fishermen, they were professionals. But they couldn't do anything about that storm. And it's sort of like our life. We're all on a journey to the other side. We're really just passing through here. This is not it. This is not it. But we're on a journey into the other side. And we have a choice because Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. So there's only one way for us to get safely to the other side with our soul and spirit intact. And that is through Jesus. So that's something we all have to decide. So the thing was, there were other storms. It says that there were other boats along with them. There were also other boats with him. You see, girls, that other people were going through the storms too. And it wasn't just hitting Jesus' boat. There were all other kinds of boat on the storm at the same time, but there was nobody else. The other boats didn't have Jesus. So if we go through life, we're going to have the storms, and our friends are going to have storms. Our kids are going to have storms. Everybody's going to have a storm. But the only ones that can really have hope that something can be done about it is the ones that are with Jesus. And that's the only way I want to do life, is with that promise of, don't be afraid, I'll help you. And that's where they were today. That the disciples didn't realize that even though they were in the storm, they were in the boat with Jesus. And I said, squalls happen. I mean, storms happen, and sometimes we feel like we're drowning, and I know I have many times, and I'm thinking, I'm going under. But I have to remember, even that, he said, let's go to the other side. He had every intention of making it there. He wasn't worried. He was asleep. So he never once did Jesus doubt their destination. And that's the same for us. He's not doubting our destination. He's not doubting our destination. He didn't even say he'd make it there alive. He just said, I'll get you to the other side. So we can't promise that everything here is going to work out the way we want. But we can promise that if we get, Jesus made a promise that no one can snatch, God said no one can snatch us out of his hand, and that he's the way, and he can get us to the other side. And I think these are the saddest words in the Bible. I do. I've decided after studying. When they woke Jesus up and they said, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? They didn't wake him up and say, Jesus, stop the storm! Stop the storm! Say something, do something! I'm getting seasick. Do something. No. They automatically thought that he didn't care. Just think of your kids when they got hurt and you've told them you're going to protect them, and they fall down and they're in the hospital, they're hurt, and they say to you, well, didn't you care? You'd be like, of course I care. It just kind of makes me sad that was their go-to, that they automatically thought that he didn't care. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to say to Jesus in my storm, don't you care? Because he demonstrated his love for us. What else does he have to do to show us that he loves us? So for me, I want to not ask him that. And so when I'm drowning, I hope that I don't say, don't you care? And I hope for you ladies, he does care. He does care. And he doesn't care less when, something bad happens than he does when something good happens. He does care. So I hope for you, if you can hear anything, just to settle that. He does care. And he is aware. He's very aware of what we're thinking. And our storms are always bigger than us. Like last night there was a little bit of rain, or even today. You ladies are still here. You are not worried about, maybe you're concerned, but the fact that you're going to drive home. That's a little scary, but it's not such a big storm that you're just like, oh, because real storms are bigger than us. They're not something that we can just fix. And Jesus is bigger than our storms. And our storms are different. When I was I was at a women's conference years ago at Mount Lebanon, and there was this little girl that was about 10 years old, and she broke her headband. It was a real crisis. I didn't have children. I think I did, mine were little, but she was beside herself. She was very, very distraught because of her headband. It was, and I remember thinking, that is a big deal to her. That is a big deal to her. At 10 years old, her headband, it was a big deal. So I don't want to compare storms, because I guarantee that you ladies have been through a lot of storms that I have no idea about. None. But Jesus is the same in all our storms. And Jesus is always bigger than any storm we face. When for me, a big storm. My mom died in 2000, and I knew she was dying. She had cancer. I thought I was prepared. I thought I was ready. I just moved to Corpus Christi. We'd only lived there about a month. Again, the little youth minister's wife, so you're supposed to be happy. And so she died, and it was just really hard. I just was really sad. I mean, I just cried all the time. All the time. I never cried so much in my life. Because I think God allowed that to happen, because before I could kind of explain everything and I would have a little great answer for everything. But it kind of opened this big box, because I'm like, okay, so I get, my mom's died, now my daddy might die, and my husband, and something could happen to my children. And so if I can't be okay in this, if I can't believe what God says here, how am I going to get through there? So it wasn't enough that I just got through that one thing. I had to think about, well, what if this, and what if that, and what if this? And I can tell you, I did come out on the other side, and I felt like I was a compassionate person before, but even more so, to know that godly people can really love God, and they can be really, really sad. Because you know what? This life is really, really hard. But God is gracious, and He loved me through that. I think it was such a special time. I can say that now. I mean, it was bad. But God was faithful, and God allowed me to see that He was enough, and that heaven was real, and that I didn't have to grieve as those without hope. So we can feel helpless, but we don't have to feel hopeless. And they were right in the boat with Jesus, and He took them into the biggest storm of their life, Sometimes you can be right in God's will, and He'll take you into the biggest storm of your life. And we moved a lot. We moved from Uvalde to Lexington, to this little church out in the country, and Mark had been a youth minister always, and now he was a pastor. And I don't know if y'all realize it, I didn't, that there's a reason that the pastor makes more money than the youth minister is, because, oh my gosh, it just changes. And it's so funny because people just almost think you're like God, okay? No, do not think that, please. And for their sake, don't even let them think you think that, because they're not. But it's a different world. But we moved, and we had all kinds of things. We had house issues. We tried to buy land. 2 deals fell through on the one after we'd actually bought it. I mean, just crazy things. I was taking a teaching job. My kids were going to college. We had to live in a 500 square foot little house that Mark had been in for 2 months by himself. Now we're 5 people in this 500 square foot house. And I took a teaching job that was awful. Those kids' goal in life was to make teachers' lives miserable, and they allowed them that spot, and they cherished that role. And I'm just kind of going crazy, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't work so hard to raise my children for 18 years to have a nervous breakdown and end up in the same asylum, which was where I was very sure I was going to go. And people would say, do you think I should have came? I'm like, well, yes, I do. I mean, because I was right in the boat with Jesus, and this is right where He brought me, and I'd rather be here with Him than go back there where I'm not supposed to be. But I said this in the other session, Jesus kind of calmed my storm, because He had to for me, because I quit my job, which is not good, because it's not a contract, they don't really like that. But I quit my job, and I took medication, okay, because I really have trouble with anxiety. I don't want to. I'm not sad, but I'll just kind of get, like I feel like I'm kind of going crazy or something, and I'm thinking all these things are going to happen. And I have taken medication off and on, really since my 3rd child was born. He's very sweet, but anyway. And I always think, I shouldn't need this. I don't like how it makes me feel, or I don't cry as easily, which is probably a good thing, because otherwise I just cry all the time. But now I can be moved, and I don't cry quite as easily. But I don't go down here either, so that's a good thing. But what I want to say to you is, God uses medication to help us And, if you have a heart disease, I never hear people with thyroid problems, heart problems, well, I'm trying to get off my medicine, I don't think I should take this. No. So I've made a covenant with God that I'm going to stay on my medication until I meet him in heaven, okay? So, and praise be to God, I'm good with that because you know what? Everything else, and after that time, and it's been a couple of times, it took me a little while to learn this. I never quit holding on to Jesus, even though, and really God has helped me most of my life to read the Word. I was so fortunate to have somebody to disciple me at an early time. And so I held on to him, and I would get up early, and I would pray, and I would cry, and I would, I never let go. And then I started exercising, and I started eating right. I was doing all the right things, but I still wasn't getting better. And as soon as I got on the medication, within a few weeks, I was better. So God had to stop my storm, but one of the ways that he helped me with that was with medication. And so I just pray that if there's somebody in here that God needs you to hear that you will hear it, because I am very glad because God has used it in my life to help me. And Jesus said to them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And I think when faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see. See, when my mom died, I wasn't sure of what I hoped for. I believed in heaven. I believed this, and there were things in my life that were definitely I had been sure about. But that was one, okay, heaven is for real, and there is some place, And I think that's why I was so afraid. That was something I had to go through, was to say, yeah, I really do believe in heaven. I really do believe that God's going to get me to the other side. I really do believe that I am not by myself. I really do believe that God is with me. I really do believe he's taking me by my hand. And the more I believe that, the less afraid I am. And then they went, "Wow, God, at the end, who is this God?" And that's what I thought when God has taken my life from so many things, and he restored me after so many things, that I can go, "Wow, God." The other story we're going to look at is in Daniel chapter 3. And we're not going to stay on there long, and I don't know what time it is. I don't want to, we got a few more minutes? Okay. In Daniel chapter 3, this is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel. And I was looking at this morning, just reading a little bit from the earlier part of that, and these guys were from noble families. They were the leaders in their country. They were prominent individuals. And I think about ISIS now, which is so awful. And I think about those people that they have taken. You know that a lot of them were from very good families, that were very loved. And now they're all of a sudden in this other place. And so I think, and then they made some choices. They decided, because the king said, "You know what, bow down to us." And they said, "No, we're not going to do that." And when the disciples got in the boat with Jesus, I don't know if they knew what was going to happen. I don't think they did. I don't think they expected that storm. But I think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they knew when they said, "We will not bow down to your idol," that there was a very real chance that they could die. I mean, we're talking like these people in ISIS. I mean, they're not just playing that they're going to torture you. That it's nothing to them. They have no problem with that. I just can't imagine the evil. But I'm thinking that with this king. This king wasn't playing around. He was like, "If you don't, this will happen." And they said no. And he was furious, and he heated the fire 7 times as hot, and the people that were throwing him in died. But I love what they said. I love what they said. And even for us, sometimes we go, "Well, what about your God? Where is he? Is he going to fix your marriage? Is he going to provide you that money? Is he going to heal that person you prayed for? Is he going to, provide this, do that? What are you going to do? Where is your God? Or where is my God?" But I love it, and I won't even take the time. But Daniel 3 is so amazing. You should just camp there. But anyway, he says, you know, Nebuchadnezzar, we're not even going to have this discussion with you. I don't need to defend myself. I don't have to answer you. Because you know what? Our God is able. He is able to deliver us. And our God is able to stop our storms. Our God is able to keep us from physical harm here. He is able. But even if he doesn't, and that's what he's, I gotta read this because it's just too good. Okay, he says, the God we serve is able, this is in verse 17, is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your hand. You know what? He's able to deliver us from divorce and all the things that we may or may not get delivered from in this world. But he says, but he will deliver us from your hand. That means he will deliver us from this. It might be today, here with you, where you see it, or it will be later. But you're not always going to have a hand on me. You're not. I will be delivered from this problem. I will be. And he's able, either here or there. But he says, and he will deliver us. But even if he doesn't, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not bow down and worship your gods. Because I think that's when we get peace. We have to come to that point of saying, our God is able to deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down to him. And that's when I think we can have peace. And we learn to do it when we're a little disappointed in the small things. So I'm going to play a song for you, and it's on the back, or if you want to go ahead and start it. And I want you to listen, because you know what? We all have storms. If you're not in one now, and I pray and I ask God, can it be a little easy? You know, but listen to this song, to praise him in the storms, because there are storms on the horizon. I don't think we've seen the end of them. I think, and when we look at our world, there's probably more ahead of us than there are behind us. I pray that God has spoken to you. I can share because he's been faithful to me. And if he can take my life that was such a mess and is still a mess in so many ways, and use me and give me hope and peace and calm, I know he can do that for you. And I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know he's good, and I know he's faithful, and I know we can trust him. And just like the disciple says, where are we going to go? Where else would we go? So I pray you'll go to him.